Including original themes, character performances, and pop songs rearranged in surprising ways, the music of Bioshock Infinite is a complex tapestry of approaches that enlivens and deepens players' journeys throughout the floating city of Columbia. Join us as we explore the processes and direction that shaped Infinite's character. We've avoided overt plot spoilers, but bear in mind that we discuss some moments that you may want to see in the game first.
My name is Jim Bonney. I've been here for about 5 years. I started my career in games about 12 years ago, working on slot machines, and got a break into video games in Midway, Chicago. While I was at Midway, I worked on Mortal Kombat, John Woo's Stranglehold, and Blitz the League. And in about 2006, right after Bioshock 1 shipped, I came out to Boston for an interview. I met Pat Balthrop and Ken Levine, and after talking to them, I just couldn't wait to work with this place.
After shaping Rapture's air of fear, grandeur, and degradation with its distinctive score, composer Gary Scheinman was asked to join Irrational Games on a new journey to the skies of Columbia. While Infinite shares some concepts with the first Bioshock, the changes in location, period, and relationships have called for a significant change in musical direction.
Both places are magnificent, but both places have problems. And the music has to reflect that. And so that I was conscious of that. Music is imperfect at saying things, but you're going from your own intuitive gut as to what sounds, like being in the air, what sounds like being under the water.
There was a lot of original music to create for this game, and it can be really challenging to talk expressively and effectively about music. And sometimes it was just easier to make the noise than talk about it. So in one case, we were trying to figure out what we would do with the music when you get through the clouds and you suddenly see Columbia. And Gary tried a couple of things, and I ended up just sitting at the piano here that I have in my office and just trying some things. And once I showed it to Ken, it was just, he really liked it, and it just kind of worked, and so we stayed with it. Another example is, I have a drum in my office, actually up there, that, again, sometimes it was easier for Ken to just grab and start banging on it to get a point across with what he wanted. So, again, sometimes it was just easier to communicate by making the music itself. Even though Bioshock Infinite is about a city in the sky, it's a big, epic story. There's a much smaller story going on, and that is about two people, Booker and Elizabeth. So it was a much more intimate experience.
Elizabeth is a very important part of the game and a very important part of the score. She's what really distinguishes, amongst many other things, Bioshock Infinite from the original Bioshock and many other games where you have this partner in the game.
Catch!
I had an idea for a theme for Elizabeth. They didn't request it, but I just had this really, what I believe was this is the right direction. I went and I recorded it with a couple of live instruments and sent it to Jim. I said, I want Ken to hear this. I really think this is something that he may love. And it was finding her theme that helped me find the score.
From the start of the game, Ken had some very clear ideas about the direction. He wanted it to not sound like Bioshock 1. He wanted it to be very simple, not complex, less is more. He wanted it to have an American sound.
At first we tried to go orchestral. I tried orchestral experiments, and it didn't seem to be working. And it was only when I discovered this Elizabeth theme and I used this small, like string quartet style arrangement, that it became clear that that was the direction. There's no orchestra. It's not an orchestral score at all, really. At most, the largest group I used had 10 players in it. We didn't want it to sound like a score, like a Hollywood film score. We really wanted a unique sound for this very unique place. Ken really was very involved, and he really wanted to approve all the music, and so he had to hear it all. The usual process for a film or a TV composer or a game composer is to what we call mock-ups. You take samples, and very often that gets replaced with live players. But because we wanted this small string ensemble, I said, you know, look, it's not going to sound like these string samples that still sort of felt like a Hollywood-ish score. The only way to do this is to go in and record the score as I write it. Usually the process is you write all the music, it all gets approved, and at the very end you have sessions and you record the music. Instead, what we did over a period of like 6 months, we had multiple sessions.
Usually every couple of weeks, and go in, record a couple of cues. He'd send those to me once they were mixed down, and I would cut them into videos of the game so that Ken could review them.
It's not the usual way to do it, but it was a very creative way to do it, and it was, I think, the most effective way to communicate to Ken what my intentions were. In Colombia, it's still a living city. People are still living and going about their daily activities. It's the polar opposite in many ways to Rapture. Everything is bright and sunny and in some ways sort of cheerful and chipper. And in fact, one of my favorite cues from the game, called Lighter Than Air, is literally, it's kind of like the Welcome to Rapture. It was inspired by when you're first walking through the city and entering it and being introduced to it. And it's not frightening at that point. So the music has this sort of melodic, almost Stephen Foster, famous songwriter from the late 1800s, wrote Camptown Races and Genie with the Light Brown Hair. So it has a little bit of that kind of vibe to it, but at the same time it has this sort of complex background to it as well.
One major change in direction from the original Bioshock is that Bioshock Infinite puts a greater emphasis on dynamic music during combat.
There's a number of combat cues, so I guess from Bioshock 1 they learned that they do need combat music. It adds drive and intensity to those moments.
We started putting music underneath combat, and one of the things that Ken noticed was that when the music didn't correspond to what was happening on screen, say something big happened in the music but something big didn't happen on screen, it took away from the cinematic feel of the game. And so Jonathan Grover, one of our audio technical designers, and I sat down and we tried to figure out what we could do so that the music became much more dynamic and responsive to what the player was doing.
I would give them 2 levels of combat intensity. One is if you're sort of backing away from the combat and it's sort of happening around you and you're not directly involved. And then there'll be a more intense layer where you are directly involved in the combat, and so the intensity level is very, very high.
Furthering this sense of interaction, signature cues directly reflect when the player scores a kill or a headshot, strongly supporting the gameplay as well as the story.
When I created combat music, I would have the orchestra, string players playing very intensely, and at the same time I added percussion. But the percussion was not these big giant hits that we often hear in big film scores or in other video games. It was sometimes very small sounding instruments, handheld instruments, me banging on metal. Jim Bonney actually recorded a little drum that he had in his office.
Gary had also written an extra string bed, and that was the basis of our combat, but we didn't have any percussion, and I figured, well, I'll just run to the next room and I'll just try beating on some stuff. And it ended up sounding pretty good.
Sometimes I played it myself. Matter of fact, most of it I played myself. And I didn't, there's this process if you're recording music digitally called quantization, where every note is lined up perfectly. I didn't try to line it up. It's often rather sloppily played, but that was part of the vibe. I brought in a percussionist for one session as well, and he did some really interesting things where he brought in various instruments, played on an old violin with a spoon. I mean, he just did all kinds of really cool experimentation.
The old-time religion, the old-time religion.
Period music has always been an important part of the Bioshock series, so there was a lot of research to do right away to kind of get a sense of what this time and place, how it could be established with music. We also wanted to establish this game with live music as well. So it was a great opportunity to work with the animators to collaborate and create these other situations where we could present music in a different way and make something special for the player. Courtney Draper was the voice of Elizabeth in the game, and she has a beautiful singing voice. And it turns out also that Booker's voice, Troy Baker, is also a very accomplished musician.
When you close your earthly story, will you join them in their bliss?
We recorded them playing and singing Will the Circle Be Unbroken, and it became a very special moment in the game that it's actually, quite frankly, it's one of my favorite moments.
Will the circle be unbroken by and by and by?
Once that song was in the game, we realized it really had this resonance that worked, and all of a sudden these other opportunities kind of presented themselves. We found a really great producer and arranger named Mark LaQuesta down in Nashville, and he put together the arrangement of Will the Circle Be Unbroken that is sung in the beginning of the game, the choral version. He asked a friend of his, Maureen Murphy, to sing lead on it, and now that I hear her voice in there, I just can't imagine anyone else singing that part.
Of wondrous love, pointed to the dying Savior, now they dwell with him above.
God only knows what I'd be without you.
One of those experiences is the barbershop quartet, God Only Knows. And this actually was born out of Ken's idea. He wanted to see what we could do if we took modern day songs and did them in a period style. So one of the things I knew right away that I wanted to do was I wanted to make sure that it never came off like parody. I didn't want it to be a farce. And I felt like the best way to do that was to try and find musicians and arrangers who really sincerely embrace these musical styles. We found a great arranger named Clay Hine to do the arrangement for God Only Knows, and I think that the performance really speaks for itself.
God only knows what I'd be without you. Without you.
Similar arrangements can be found throughout the game, many done by arranger Scott Bradley. An instrumental version of Girls Just Wanna Have Fun is the perfect complement to Elizabeth's first chance to play on the beach. While Everybody Wants to Rule the World plays in the midst of revolutionary destruction.
Everybody wants to rule the world.
One song, Lutess, called for Shyman to compose a distinctive theme for the character's quirky and enigmatic personalities.
And so I wrote sort of a waltz. It's sort of elegant, almost tango-ish, waltzy, dancey. There's a little bit of humor to it. I think a little slightly tongue-in-cheek quality. So it was really fun to find that style and to include it in the score. It's not something you would think of as associated with an intense video game.
If you keep this up, I'll be forced to start repeating myself.
All three Bioshock scores, really from a composer standpoint, are super unique opportunities. They're not like the typical kinds of scores composers are asked to write. All three have asked for and wanted really unique music, and so I just consider myself a very lucky composer to have been involved with such a creative group of developers, and I'm excited to have the game come out.
Love music and video games? Backtrack's spring season is just getting started. Come back Mondays in April as we highlight some of the best songs in gaming, from the distant past to present day, right here on GT. See all of our shows and game reviews now on the brand new GT app on Xbox Live, and the GT Originals iOS app too.